and it was buried in my family. Nobody talked about it. And, my sister went to our pastor at the time. He wasn't able to explain nothing. Later on, she went and seen some other, spiritual advisors. Most of them had a very superficial way of looking at this that had to do with just thinking that she was either crazy, or that it might be demonological, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that was not something that my family bought into, and so we simply buried it. But the thing is, it never stopped.
Oh, really?
It continued to happen her whole life, and at times it couldn't be predicted. She wound up marrying a man who worked for Los Alamos, and the man that worked at Los Alamos told her that the experiences were real. Also shared other private information with her that she would never share with anybody. And I'm the person she's the closest to. She would never share any of this information with me. One day he was just disappeared. He never came home. She never found out about it. Years later, in her contacting the U.S. government trying to figure out what happened to her husband, finally they let her know that he had been killed at Los Alamos. They would not tell her why, but they did let her have his Social Security, which meant that somebody since they would not issue a death certificate, somebody way up the line had to approve that at some level in the government for her to be able to draw his Social Security. Years later, her daughter is working as a federal employee for the Social Security Division, and she started having exactly the same experiences.
Oh, man.
And when she went to the head psych doctor at the Social Security Division, they told her not only was it real, but that the government was aware of it. These are facts. Anyway, and then eventually her daughter, so now you had 3 generations of women, her daughter started having the same experiences. These are all people who do not talk about this phenomenon. They are not interested in publicity. They have talked to me only privately, and aware of the fact that sometimes when I'm on radio, I will share some of these events, but I don't name the people. I don't provide any other kind of information for them because they're not seeking publicity. They're not interested in any of that. But this is a phenomenon that is real. And the story, I don't want to just get caught up in this one story, but I mean, the story is so deep that even eventually Steven Spielberg identified my niece, the second in this line of lineage, as when he was doing his Taken television series, identified her as one of 2 people out of the state of Oregon that he concluded was an abductee, and even allowed her to see his private collection of alien implants. So there's a lot to that story, and one of these days I'll write the book and tell the whole story. I'm going to talk a little bit about that probably when I'm at the Roswell convention.
Fascinating stuff.
It's what made me start thinking that there is something to this, because growing up in a family like that and burying this activity, not talking about it publicly, but years later, here I am, and I'm a pastor, for crying out loud, and yet I know that this activity was going on in my family, and as decades went by, I started seeing where other people around the world were giving testimony to an extraordinary event that was touching them. And when I'm reading their stories, I'm realizing that their descriptions and that the sense that they had about what was going on and that their feelings, that these are things that were, if not identical, very comparable to, in almost every case, the ones that were believable, the same thing that my sister had been going through. So it made me feel that there was, in fact, something here that was going on and that it was real.
Yeah.
So,
if we say like this, an explanation for you with concerning this phenomenon and the experiences that your family and so forth have had with this has fallen to become, known as the Nephilim from the Bible, right? This is the connection.
Certainly. Look, when we were writing the book, The Ahriman Gate. And it's very interesting, Henrik, how we got on this. It was about maybe 12 years ago, and at the time I was doing research for some leading newspapers, some large newspapers here in the United States. I was a researcher for several newspapers, and I'm doing research work, and I came across a grant that the U.S. government was giving to a particular company for purposes of research into transgenic science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never heard this term, transgenics. I didn't even know what it meant. And as I read the meaning of the term transgenics and realized that they were talking about, merging the genetics, the DNA of one species with the DNA of another species, I had an interest in why they would do that. It was fascinating to me. And I found out that year, fully 1/4 of all federal research grants in the United States were going to transgenics, and I was just blown away by this. I thought,
oh my.
If 1/4 of our tax dollars in the United States, which is the most tax dollars in the world per country, if this is going to transgenic research, and I've never heard of this term, and I'm a researcher, and I know that the general public is way outside of the loop on this, and what is this all about? So I started digging into this and finding anything I could about biotechnology, synthetic biology, genetic engineering, genetic modification, cloning, stem cell science, transgenic science, all of that.
Yeah.
And I was stunned that nobody in the faith community was writing about this at all. I mean, I could not find a single book. I couldn't find a single news story.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about what might be some of the ramifications, what might be some of the ethics or philosophical questions raised by what was happening in this emerging science.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a couple of editorials. One of these editorials received fairly wide publication, and one of the people that contacted me right after the fact was Cal Thomas, the syndicated columnist for the LA Times and the co-host at that time of CNN's Crossfire.
Okay.
And he wanted to share with me his opinion that what I had written was evidence, at least in his world view, that the world was winding down, that we had entered this quickening of events that foreshadowed end-of-the-world prophecies from all these different religions. I mean, he just believed that what I was talking about pointed to that. Now, after I received his response, there were others that were followed, and soon it started becoming evident to me that most of the common people were woefully unaware of a new dawn of science and technology that was ultimately going to open the door to the prospects on the positive side, the prospects for the cure of various kinds of debilitating diseases, which could be a good thing, but on the other side, the prospects of a transhumanist future, as well as maybe even potentially a biological Pandora's box, a biological nightmare.
Yeah, indeed.
Which you and I talked about a year ago, what we're seeing already in genetically modified crops.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
so I had started compiling all of this research material. I was up to thousands of pages, and anything I could find, as well as making contacts with actual people who were involved in biotechnology, anybody that was willing to talk to me about the subject. Now, but because the first book that I wrote in this field was a novel, the Ahriman Gate, I brought my wife on board because she's a novelist and I'm not, to help me with developing the characters and all that. The book went on to become a bestseller because people are interested in this whole idea that biotechnology might actually be used to resurrect dead Nephilim or some other kind of a nightmare scenario as we had outlined in that book.
Yeah.
But it was the real science and the real history that stuck out to me as the most thrilling.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it almost seemed to me when we were doing the research for this book, in order to make the novel believable, we wanted the science to be such that if a person reading the novel read in the book about cloning or transgenics, it would sound believable to somebody who might know something about science. So we were doing all of this research, but while we were doing that, this odd thing happened, Hendrik, in that we're trying to find stories about the cross-blending of species.
Mm.
And what we kept running into was this telling in ancient history of an event.
Mm.
Because these were the real records that were out there, and they were everywhere. In every mythos of every great culture around the world, a story of the gods who came down and they tinkered with genetic material, DNA of humans and other living species. And it started feeling like we were actually retracing the first records in history of actual transgenic science, which had been conducted by these super intelligences who, for their own reasons, were the first to open the Ahriman Gate. And I started wondering, is man today rushing into sciences that had been first introduced on Earth thousands of years ago that led to chaos, and astonishingly, that seemed to be the record. All these different civilizations.
So what?
Making this.
Yeah. Why do you think, if we were to put it like this? Is this, as you say, a return in the sense that there's something coming from the outside in, or this is something that is happening, on the planet, a development of these creatures? That is what you're saying, right?
You know what? I think it could actually be both. I think it could actually be both. If things existed once before, and there was some method by which the incarnated expressions, let's call them the Nephilim, were destroyed. But there are texts, and we can talk about those texts. I don't know if we'll run out of time today, but if we do, I can come back at some point and we can talk about those texts. There are ancient records that tell us that the spirits of these destroyed supernaturals exist in another dimension and can be resurrected back into our three-dimensional reality. And in the same way that it happened the first time. Okay, so you have this story, whether it's the Bible or other ancient text, records from Greek mythology, Assyrian mythology, Egyptian mythology. You have this story.
That's right.
Of these gods who came down. And what was it that they did? They mingled their species with the human race.
Yeah, that's right.
But note that it was the methodology. What appeared to be a record of advanced science, what for the life of me, what looks like modern biotechnology, where in all of these different mythologies, these gods, in order to materialize or to take three-dimensional expression, for some reason it seemed to require the need to blend these different species in order to create some pathway, some portal through which they could extend themselves into our material world. For instance, such ancient texts as the Book of Jasher, which is an extra-biblical book. But it's referred to in the Bible, in the book of Joshua 10:13, and also in 2 Samuel 1:18. And this Jasher says this, in Jasher 4:18, it says, "And the fallen angels went in to the daughters of men." Or it says, after the fallen angels went in to the daughters of men, the sons of men taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other in order to provoke the Lord, end quote. Now that's obviously a direct reference to the Genesis 6 accord and also to some other outside of the Bible books like the Genesis Apocryphon and the Book of Enoch and so on.
Yeah, indeed.
That are a record of some kind of event. But the interesting thing to me in this Book of Jasher, and there were many other texts that I found, was that it included the part of the history of this event was that as soon as this event happened, suddenly the sons of men began teaching the mixture of one species with another species. Now, I also noted, as I was doing this research, which led me to ufology, which we also included in that book, The Ahriman Gate, and we do also include that in this new book. I also noted, though, that in abduction records,